Hello, class. Here is a review of everything we learned today. I'm starting with Jefferson, and then Jerry will do James Madison. Jefferson's going to beat John Adams in the election of 1800. It'll be the first peaceful transition of power. Due to a loophole, Aaron Burr will end up with the same amount of electoral votes and will try to steal the race, but will fail. And this is going to lead to the 12th Amendment. As Adams is on his way out, he appoints a lot of new Supreme Court justices. He attempts to appoint William Marbury, but since James Madison doesn't deliver the commission, Marbury will sue. The Supreme Court will rule in favor of Madison. However, it will also set up the precedent of judicial review, as we discussed. The Louisiana Purchase, as the U.S. paid $15 million to France to double their size with the Louisiana Territory, went against Jefferson's beliefs of a strict interpretation, but he thought it was best for the people. And Lewis and Clark will explore and document this new territory. In terms of foreign affairs, the Barbary pirates will cause the first major war, as we discussed. Impressment plus economic restrictions will lead to embargoes on France and England. These will do little for European economies, but this will spark rising tensions that will lead to the War of 1812.
All right, so before we can understand Madison's presidency, we have to know the things that Jefferson has done. So in response to British and French impressment, basically a violation of American neutrality, he passed the Embargo Act. And what the Embargo Act basically did was it halted all U.S. exports to Europe. And basically it was just an attempt to put pressure on France and Britain and make them stop impressing U.S. sailors. Now, ultimately, it had very little impact to European economy, and it was just basically putting the American economy in a really bad spot instead. So ultimately, it was a major failure. So instead of that, Jefferson, right before Madison's presidency, he came up with the Non-Intercourse Act. Now, what the Non-Intercourse Act did was it halted all U.S. exports just to belligerent nations. So Britain and France, which means that those two nations were the only two nations that didn't receive any U.S. exports. Now, this was also not really effective because smuggling, number one, was really just kind of ruining the entire purpose of this act, and overall, once again, it didn't have much impact to France and Britain. So Madison was just handed over with this whole dilemma that Jefferson was unable to resolve. So that leads us into Macon's bill. So what Macon's bill number 2 is that it essentially tried to resume trade relations with Britain and France, but it failed at making European powers stop impressing American sailors. And it led to Madison eventually declaring war on Britain in 1812. All right, so now we're on to the War of 1812. Now, two major battles of the War of 1812 are the Battle of Bladensburg and the Battle of New Orleans. Now, the Battle of Bladensburg ultimately led to the burning of the White House. As you can see, the burning of Washington, D.C., and through the image over there. And also the Battle of New Orleans. And it saw the rise of Andrew Jackson as a national war hero. Now, finally, let's talk about the effects of the War of 1812, right? So what the War of 1812 led to was actually just a restoration of previous boundaries. So no substantial land was gained or lost through this war for the Americans. So it wasn't necessarily very influential war in terms of land. Led to the Hartford Convention, which is Federalists from northern states that met together to talk about the Democratic Republicans who were sort of plotting against them, and it was seen as a form of treason, and it ultimately led to the recession of the Federalist Party and the ultimate collapse of it. And national pride also increased after the War of 1812, kind of showed off that the United States was actually a competent nation militarily. And finally, the War of 1812 grew the American industry because it kind of made America dependent on its own producing power. It made itself very self-sufficient, and it could just produce its own goods and be sustainable on its own.